4 light years from the nearest star. In a dark so complete that the sun behind is just one more point among the thousands, a single lit shape moves through the black. It is enormous, a turning cylinder miles long, its hull scarred and pitted by 100 years of crossing, and inside it the lights are on and the air is warm, and a third generation of human beings is going about the business of a life none of them chose. None of them has ever seen the world the ship left. None of them will ever see the world it is aimed at. They were born in the corridor between in a moving world with metal for sky and a hull for horizon, and they will die there, and their children will inherit the same walls. The ship does not slow, it does not turn, it holds its heading toward a star still lifetimes away, carrying its small crowd of lives deeper into a dark that does not know they are there. And somewhere in its walls, quietly, without alarm, the oxygen has already begun to do the one thing no one aboard can stop it from doing. The crossing is going exactly as planned. That is the most frightening thing about it. The thing we are sitting with tonight is what actually happens inside a ship built to carry human beings across the gulf between the stars. Not for years, but for centuries. The common picture is hopeful, an ark gliding through the dark, its passengers waking their descendants into a new dawn on a new world. What actually happens is harder, and it has almost nothing to do with the distance and almost everything to do with the box. A sealed world cannot hold its own air, cannot keep its own genes, cannot pass its own purpose down a long enough chain of strangers without all of it beginning to come apart. By the time we are done tonight, the idea of the ark is going to read differently. It is going to look less like a vessel that carries life across the dark, and more like a small closed world quietly failing, in every direction at once, for the entire length of a journey no one aboard will live to finish. Return to the cylinder, because the life inside it is the thing worth looking at first. The ship turns slowly on its long axis, one full rotation every minute or two, and that turning is what holds the people to the inner surface of the hull, what gives them a floor to stand on and a direction to cool down. From the inside, it does not feel like spinning. It feels like ground. There are levels and corridors and wide curved chambers where things grow under banks of artificial light, and the people who live there walk and work and sleep the way people have always done, except that the floor curves up ahead of them and behind them, rising on both sides until it becomes the ceiling, so that a person looking up sees not sky, but the far side of their own world, the fields and lights and dwellings of their neighbours hanging overhead, upside down, going about the same small business of living. The scale of such a vessel is hard to take in from the outside. To hold a population large enough to last the crossing, and the gardens to feed them, and the machinery to keep the air and water cycling, and the shielding to turn aside the worst of the radiation, the ship cannot be a sleek craft in the way the word vessel suggests. It must be a structure miles long, a hollow world of decks and chambers and growing spaces wrapped around a central axis, its mass measured in the millions of tons, a thing closer to a small moved mountain than to any ship that ever sailed. And all of that mass must be accelerated, somehow, to a speed that crosses the dark and then slowed again at the far end, which is its own impossibility set aside for now. The point is the size. The ark is not a boat, it is a world, and worlds are heavy, and a heavy world is hard to move and harder to stop. This is the strangeness the cold open hides behind its calm. The people aboard are not travellers in the way the word usually means. A traveller remembers leaving and expects to arrive. These people have done neither and will do neither. The ones who remember the launch are long dead, a founding generation that stepped aboard knowing they would never see the end, that gave their lives to the beginning of a crossing whose middle and end belonged to people not yet born. The third generation, now living in the curved chambers, never saw the world that built the ship. They have only stories of it, images, a blue and green sphere that hangs in their records like a thing out of myth, a place with weather and oceans and a sky that was not a hull, a place none of them has touched and none of them ever will. The nearest star to the Sun is a small red ember called Proxima Centauri, and it sits about 4.25 light-years away. That number is easy to say and almost impossible to feel. Light, the fastest thing there is, the thing that crosses from the Sun to the Earth in about 8 minutes, takes more than 4 years to cross the gap to Proxima. The light leaving that red star tonight will not arrive at the Earth until a child born tonight is starting school. And a ship, any ship that human hands could actually build, moves so far below the speed of light that the crossing it must make is not measured in years at all. It is measured in lifetimes, stacked one on another, a chain of human generations long enough that the people who finish the voyage share almost nothing with the people who began it, except the walls. And Proxima is the near one, the easy one, the closest star there is. The sky is full of others, and almost all of them are farther, many of them far enough that the crossing times climb from tens of thousands of years into the hundreds of thousands. The bright stars that fill the night and seem like neighbours are mostly distant beyond any hope of reaching, their nearness an illusion of brightness, not of distance. When the eye picks out a star and the mind imagines travelling there, it is imagining a journey that would outlast, not generations but whole civilizations. A crossing so long that the species which began it might evolve into something else before it ended. Proxima, the nearest, the most reachable, the best case in the entire sky, still demands a voyage of lifetimes. Everything else demands far more. So the crew of a generation ship is never the crew that launched it. That is the first hard fact, and it reframes everything. The mission is not undertaken by the people who arrive, it is undertaken by the dead on behalf of the unborn and carried out in the long middle by generations who are neither, who never agreed to anything, who simply opened their eyes one day inside a turning cylinder and found that this was the world and these were the walls and the voyage was already old. They did not volunteer. They were born into a decision made before their grandparents were born, and the decision cannot be unmade because there is nowhere to turn the ship around to, and no one left alive who remembers wanting to. The founders understood this when they sealed the hatch, and that understanding is its own kind of weight. They knew, stepping aboard, that they were not passengers but ancestors, that the voyage they began would be finished by people they would never meet, that their own role was only to start a thing and then to live and die inside its beginning. They gave up the sky of their birth knowing there would be no landfall for them, no new world, no reward but the act of departure itself, whatever drove them, desperation or vision, or the simple refusal to let the species stay in one fragile place. They bought the voyage with their own complete lives and the lives of every generation they would father, and they bought it for the sake of an arrival none of their line would witness for centuries. It is the strangest bargain a person could make, to give everything for a destination one cannot reach, and the founders made it with open eyes. Their descendants in the deep middle did not make it at all. Consider what it means to live an entire life inside a single sealed building, because that is closer to the truth than any image of sails and stars. A person aboard the ship is born in it, learns to walk in its curved corridors, grows up under its artificial lights, takes up work maintaining its systems or tending its gardens, raises children who will do the same, grows old and dies, all without once stepping through a door to the outside, because there is no outside that a body could survive, only the killing dark beyond the hull. The walls are not walls in the way a house has walls. They are the edge of the world. Everything that exists, for a person born aboard, is contained within a few miles of spinning metal, and beyond it there is nothing but the black and the distant, unreachable lights, and the destination, which is a word more than a place. The light tells the deepest version of the lie. A day aboard the ship is not a day at all, but a setting, a cycle of brightening and dimming that the founders chose and the machines obey, a rhythm borrowed from a planet none of the living have seen and imposed on a world that has no real morning and no real night. The lights rise on a schedule, the lights fall on a schedule. The people aboard sleep and wake to a sun that does not exist, marking out the turning of a planet they left behind, keeping the body's old clock running on a memory of a world rather than the truth of their own. There is no dawn on the ship, only the imitation of one, switched on each cycle because a body shaped by a planet still expects it. A borrowed sunrise repeated in the dark for people who would not recognize the real thing if they saw it. Right now, the fastest object human hands have ever flung outward, a small probe built to graze the sun, is moving at a speed that would have seemed impossible a lifetime ago, and even it, aimed at Proxima Centauri, would take thousands upon thousands of years to arrive. The fastest thing ever built, and the nearest star is still effectively out of reach within any span a person or a nation could plan for. That is the scale the generation ship is built to defeat, and the only way it can defeat it is by giving up on any single crew ever making the trip, by becoming not a vehicle that carries people, but a world that carries lineages, a place where the journey is measured not in the life of a traveller, but in the turning over of generations. The hopeful version of this story is the one almost everyone carries, and it is worth stating plainly before it comes apart. In that version, the generation ship is humanity's lifeboat, a noble vessel that lifts a seed of life off a single fragile world and carries it across the dark to plant it on another, so that the species is no longer all in one place, no longer one disaster away from ending. In that version, the hardship of the crossing is a price worth paying. The generations in the middle are heroes of a long relay, and the arrival is a triumph, a new dawn on a new shore, the whole sacrifice redeemed in a single moment of landfall. It is a beautiful story. It is the story that would launch the ship. It is also a story that does not survive contact with what a sealed world actually is, because the distance is only the obvious problem, the one everyone sees first, the great gulf that makes the whole enterprise necessary. The distance is not even the hard part. The hard part is hidden inside the ship, in the air and the genes and the minds and the slow wearing of the machines, in everything that a closed world must do for itself across centuries, because there is no outside to do it for them. The reason the trip takes generations is not a failure of ambition or engineering. It is a wall built into the universe itself, and the wall is closer and harder than almost anyone believes. Pull away from the warm interior, out through the hull, out into the black, and keep pulling until the great cylinder is a single dim spark against the dark, and the line of its journey can be seen whole. From here the crossing shows its true shape, a thin thread drawn between 2 points of light, the sun behind and Proxima ahead, and the thread is so long that the ship upon it does not appear to move at all. It hangs there, a mote on an invisible wire, and the wire runs on for a distance that the mind reaches for and cannot hold. The thread looks short only because the points at each end are bright. 2 stars, the sun behind and Proxima ahead, anchor the line, and the eye wants to read the gap between 2 visible things as a crossable span, the way the gap between 2 hills is crossable. But the brightness of the endpoints says nothing about the length between them, and the length between them is the thing that defeats everything. Light itself, which crosses from the sun to the earth in the time it takes to boil an egg, needs more than 4 years to run the length of this single thread, and light is the fastest thing the universe allows. A ship is not light. A ship is slower than light by a factor so large that the 4-year crossing of the fastest thing there is becomes, for the fastest thing humanity can build, a crossing of many thousands of years. The thread is short to look at and endless to travel, and that gap between how it looks and how it travels is the whole tragedy of the distance. The gap to the nearest star is not large in the way a country is large, or an ocean, or even a planet. It is large in a different category entirely, a size that breaks the tools the mind uses for size. Set it against something the body knows. The distance from the sun to the earth is already so great that light takes 8 minutes to cross it, a gap a fast aircraft would need decades to span. The nearest star is more than 260,000 times farther than that. If the gap from the sun to the earth were a single step, The gap to Proxima Centauri would be a walk most of the way across a continent, step after step after step, each one the full distance to the Sun, hundreds of thousands of them in a row. That is the wall, and it is worth being precise about how completely it defeats every engine humanity can actually build. The rockets that lift things off the Earth burn chemical fuel, and chemical fuel is feeble against a gap like this. A ship driven by the best chemical rockets, aimed at Proxima Centauri, would need something on the order of 70,000 years to arrive. 70,000 years, longer than all of recorded history many times over. Longer than the species has had cities or writing or farms, a span so long that the people who arrived would be separated from the people who launched by more time than separates the present from the first cave paintings. The trouble is fuel, and the trouble compounds on itself in a way that closes the door from the inside. To go faster, a ship must carry more fuel, but fuel has mass, and the more fuel a ship carries, the more mass it must accelerate, which demands still more fuel to move the fuel, which adds still more mass, the requirement climbing on itself faster than any gain in speed, to reach even a modest fraction of light speed by carrying and burning fuel. A ship would need a fuel load so enormous that no structure could hold it and no launch could lift it. The rocket that works beautifully for crossing the gap between planets runs into a wall when aimed between the stars, not because the idea is wrong, but because the arithmetic of carrying one's own fuel turns viciously against any attempt to go truly fast. The engine that could cross the gulf quickly cannot carry the fuel to run, and the engine that can carry its fuel cannot cross the gulf quickly. And the fastest things humanity has ever actually flown do not help nearly as much as hope would like. The two Voyager probes, launched in the 1970s and now drifting outward beyond the edge of the Sun's influence, are among the fastest objects ever made, moving at tens of thousands of miles an hour, fast enough to cross the United States in under a minute. Aimed at the nearest star, those probes would take something like 80,000 years to arrive, the fastest sustained travelers the species has ever produced, and the nearest star is still 80,000 years away. More than 2,000 human generations laid end to end. A relay so long that the language spoken at the start would be unrecognizable noise to the ears at the finish. To make the crossing in anything like a single lifetime would demand a ship moving at a substantial fraction of the speed of light, and nothing humanity can build comes remotely close. The speeds required are tens of thousands of times beyond the fastest rocket ever fired, and the energy needed to reach them and then to shed them again at the far end so the ship does not simply flash past its destination is beyond anything a civilization has ever marshalled. The fast crossing is not a matter of better engineering of the same kind. It is a different order of thing, as far beyond current rockets as a rocket is beyond a thrown stone, and it remains for any ship that could actually be built firmly out of reach. The exotic answers that might break this wall all lie beyond what any civilization has ever done. A ship that gathered its fuel from the thin matter of space as it flew, a ship pushed by a beam of light fired from the home system, a ship driven by the controlled detonation of fusion bombs behind it. Each of these has been imagined, sketched, argued over, and every one of them demands engineering, energy, and precision so far past the present reach of the species that they remain closer to hope than to plan. None has ever been built. None is close to being built. And even the most optimistic of them, if it could be built at all, would reach speeds that still stretch the nearest crossing across decades at the very least, and the farther destinations across centuries, the wall lowered perhaps but never truly broken. For any ship that human hands could actually assemble and launch, the crossing remains a thing of lifetimes, and the lifetimes remain stacked into generations. So the ship crawls. That is the conclusion the arithmetic forces, and everything else follows from it. Since no buildable engine can cross the gap fast, any real arc must cross it slow, and crossing it slow means the voyage outlasts not one life but dozens, which means the ship cannot be a vehicle that carries a crew. It must be a world that carries a population, a sealed place where people are born and live and die and are replaced by their children, generation after generation, for as long as the crossing takes. The generations are not a romantic flourish, they are forced by the wall. The distance is so great and the speed so limited that the only way across is to build a world that can keep human beings alive and reproducing for centuries. The word cruel undersells how strange the pace really is against the distance. A ship moving at even 1/100th of the speed of light, far faster than anything humanity has built, would still take more than 4 centuries to reach Proxima, 400 years of crossing, longer than the time separating the present from the age of the first telescopes. And 1/100th of light speed is itself a wildly optimistic figure, beyond any engine on any drawing board that could actually be built and fueled. The realistic crossings, the ones that use means a civilization might actually assemble, stretch not across 4 centuries, but across 1 or 2 or several thousand years, a span in which empires rise and fall many times over, in which languages are born and die, in which the very meaning of the mission has every opportunity to crumble. The ship crawls so slowly against so vast a gap that the crawl itself becomes the central fact of the voyage, the thing that forces everything else. There is a quiet brutality in how the wall closes off every escape. A faster engine would spare the generations, but no faster engine can be built. A nearer destination would shorten the trip, but Proxima is already the nearest star there is, and the next ones out are farther still, many of them tens of light years away. The crossing times climbing into the hundreds of thousands of years. A smaller, lighter ship might go faster, but a ship that must sustain a breeding population for centuries cannot be small. Every door the mind reaches for is already shut by the same fact, the sheer size of the gap set against the feebleness of any real means of crossing it. And behind every shut door is the same answer: generations, generations, generations. The brightness of the night sky hides the cruelty of it. The stars look near because they are bright, scattered across the dark like lamps that a fast enough ship might string together into a route, one waypoint after another. But brightness is not nearness. A star can blaze in the sky and lie so far off that its light, the fastest thing there is, spent decades or centuries crossing the gap to be seen at all. The sky offers no stepping stones, no chain of close harbours to hop between, only a scattering of distant fires that the eye flattens into a false closeness. Behind Proxima, the nearest, lie the others, each one a longer crossing than the last, the reachable shrinking to almost nothing the moment the true distances are restored. The generation ship is built to reach the very nearest of them, the single closest fire in the whole sky, and even that one demands a voyage that outlasts the people who begin it. The rest of the sky is, for any real ship, simply unreachable, bright and beautiful, and forever out of range. Right now, those 2 Voyager probes are still moving, still drifting outward through the dark at their tens of thousands of miles an hour, and they will keep drifting for those tens of thousands of years, crossing distances that would carry them to the nearest stars if they were aimed that way, which they are not. They are the high mark of human speed, launched within a single lifetime and still climbing outward, and they stand as a plain measure of the wall. The fastest we have ever gone, set against the nearest place worth going, comes out to 80,000 years. That is the gap a generation ship is built to cross, and the only tool it has for crossing it is time, paid in lifetimes. So the engine was never the hard part. Strange as that sounds, the hard part is not propulsion at all. Even granting the ship a way to move, even setting aside the impossible energies, the deeper problem is the one the generations create. A ship that must keep human beings alive for centuries is not an engineering problem of thrust and fuel. It is the problem of building a world. It must make its own air and remake it as it spoils. It must grow its own food endlessly, with no resupply. It must keep its people healthy in a place the body was never built for, and keep them numerous and varied enough to stay healthy across generations, and keep them willing across all those generations to maintain a voyage none of them chose. The hard part is keeping a sealed world breathing for longer than any human institution has ever lasted, and that is a far harder thing to build than any engine. Move the camera back through the hull, past the lights and the corridors, and hold it on something invisible, the air itself. The warm, breathable atmosphere inside the cylinder, the thing that makes the whole interior feel like an ordinary place, is not a given and not a backdrop. It is a sealed volume of gas, a closed jar of air with a fixed amount of oxygen in it, and every breath every person takes pulls a little of that oxygen out and puts carbon dioxide back. And every plant in the gardens does the reverse, and the entire survival of everyone aboard depends on those two flows staying in a balance so fine that no closed system humanity has ever built has managed to hold it. Every breath a person takes aboard the ship is a small withdrawal from a closed account, and every breath is also a small deposit of poison. A body breathes in oxygen and breathes out carbon dioxide, and in a sealed world, both halves of that exchange matter. The oxygen drawn down with each breath and the carbon dioxide building up, with each one, two clocks running in opposite directions at once. The plants reverse it, taking the carbon dioxide and returning the oxygen, and so the whole survival of everyone aboard rests on the plants exactly keeping pace with the people, the green half of the world breathing in perfect time with the breathing half, neither falling behind. Let the plants lag, through blight or drift or simple imbalance, and the carbon dioxide climbs while the oxygen falls, the air going stale and then foul and then deadly, not in some distant failure, but in the ordinary outcome of a garden that cannot quite keep up with the lungs it feeds. This is where the story turns, and the turn is sharp. The whole first stretch framed the problem as distance, as the gulf outside, the great gap the ship must cross. That framing was a misdirection, true as far as it went, but pointed at the wrong enemy. The gulf is not what kills a generation ship. The box is. The real problem was never the emptiness the ship moves through, but the small sealed world it carries inside, a closed ecosystem that cannot hold its own chemistry, that begins drifting toward imbalance the instant it is sealed and never stops. The threat is not out there in the dark, it is in here, in the air, and the air is already failing. The common assumption is comfortable and wrong. It says that a large enough garden, with good enough recycling, would keep a closed habitat stable forever. The plants breathing out what the people breathe in, the water cycling around, a little green world humming along in perfect balance indefinitely. It is an intuitive picture, and it has been tested, once seriously, on the ground, in the only full attempt humanity has ever made to seal living people inside a fully self-contained world and see whether the balance holds. The attempt was called Biosphere 2, a vast sealed structure of glass in the Arizona desert. And what happened inside it is the clearest warning the species has ever been given about the box. Step inside that sealed glass world as it was. 8 people closed themselves into it, with gardens and a tiny ocean and a patch of rainforest, all of it sealed under glass, all of it meant to cycle in balance and keep them alive for 2 years without anything passing in or out but sunlight and information. For a while it held, then slowly, without any alarm, the oxygen began to fall. The air had started at the ordinary level, about 21 parts in 100, the level every human lung is built for. Month by month it dropped, 20, then 19, then lower, the decline so gradual that nothing announced it, and as it fell the people inside began to suffer, growing tired, growing short of breath, struggling to think clearly and to sleep, their bodies labouring in an atmosphere that was quietly thinning around them. Within 16 months the oxygen had fallen to about 14 parts in 100. The air inside the sealed world now as thin as the air on a mountain near 13,000 feet. And the crew were gasping through tasks that should have been easy, until at last the experiment had to break its own seal and pump oxygen in from outside, simply to keep the people functional. The closed world had failed at the most basic task there is, holding its own breathable air, and it had failed not through any dramatic accident, but through a slow drift, no one had fully predicted. The reason the oxygen vanished is the part that should chill anyone who imagines a sealed ship. The oxygen did not leak away into space. It went somewhere inside, somewhere no one had counted. Some of it was consumed by microbes in the rich soil that had been brought in to grow food, tiny organisms breathing far more than anyone expected, and some of it, strangely, was being taken up by the bare concrete of the structure itself, the curing of the concrete pulling oxygen out of the air and locking it into the walls. The world had eaten its own air, partly through its soil and partly through its own bones, and the lesson was stark. A closed world contains every surface in it, including the ones no one thought of as part of the ecology. The walls are part of the system, the soil is part of the system. Everything inside the seal is in the loop, and a single unaccounted reaction can quietly devour the very thing the people inside need to breathe. And the loss did not announce itself, which is the quietest horror in it. There was no leak to find, no breach to seal, no single broken thing to point at and fix. The oxygen simply went, drawn down by ordinary processes that no one had fully accounted for. The decline so gradual and so silent that the people inside grew sick before they understood why. A sealed world does not usually fail with an alarm and a rush of escaping air. It fails the way the glass world failed, slowly, invisibly, the balance tipping by a fraction each day, the people inside adapting to each small worsening until the cumulative drift has carried them somewhere their bodies cannot follow. The ship would fail the same way, not with a dramatic rupture, but with a slow chemical drift in a tank of air, a number sliding the wrong direction across years, and by the time anyone aboard felt it plainly, the drift would already be old. Think of the sealed atmosphere as a jar of preserves that must stay in perfect balance forever. On the kitchen shelf, a jar of preserves can sit for years, but only because nothing inside it is alive and breathing and reacting. Only because it has been brought to a kind of stillness. The air of a closed living world is the opposite, a jar packed with things that breathe and grow and react, soil and people and plants and bare metal and concrete. Every one of them a draw on the balance, and to keep that jar stable is to keep dozens of competing reactions in a standoff so precise that a small unnoticed leak in any one of them, a little extra microbial breathing, a slow chemical uptake into a wall, can tip the whole thing toward a state the people inside cannot survive. The jar does not need to break to kill what is inside it, it only needs to drift. Food is the same problem wearing a different face, and it cannot be solved by stockpiling. A voyage of centuries cannot carry centuries of meals in storage, because stored food spoils, and because the sheer mass of feeding a population for that long would be its own impossible cargo. So the food must be grown, continuously, aboard the ship, crops raised under artificial light in soil or water that must itself be kept alive and balanced, every harvest feeding the people, and every scrap of waste returned to feed the next planting. The garden that makes the food is the same garden that makes the air, the plants breathing out the oxygen as they grow the grain, so that a failure in one is a failure in both at once. A blight that takes the crops takes the air with it. A drift that fouls the air starves the crops. The systems that keep the people fed, and the systems that keep them breathing, are not two safety nets but one, and one failure pulls down everything that hangs from it. And the ship cannot do what the experiment did. When the oxygen fell in the sealed glass world, the people inside could open the seal and pump in air from the vast breathable atmosphere of the Earth all around them. A generation ship has no such outside. The Earth is light years behind it, unreachable, and the dark all around holds no air at all. Whatever drift begins inside the ship's atmosphere must be corrected from within, using only what the ship carries and what the ship can make, with no reservoir to draw on, no planet's worth of air to lean against, no resupply of any kind ever. The closed world of the ship is closed in a way the glass structure never truly was, sealed not against a desert, but against the whole emptiness of interstellar space, and adrift in its air is adrift with no outside cure. This is the loneliest fact about a closed world, that its closure is total in a way nothing on a planet ever is. On the Earth, every sealed room is sealed only locally, surrounded by a whole breathing world that leaks in at every edge, air under every door, the vast atmosphere always there to dilute and correct any local fouling. Nothing on a planet is ever truly closed, because the planet is always there, enormous and forgiving, absorbing every mistake. A ship in the dark has no such surrounding world. Its seal is against the absolute emptiness of interstellar space, a place with no air to leak in, no atmosphere to lean against, no forgiveness anywhere. When its air drifts, there is nothing outside to dilute the drift. When a cycle fails, there is no larger cycle to absorb the failure. The closure is complete, and completeness is precisely what makes it deadly, because a truly closed world has no margin but the one it carries, and the margin it carries is finite, and the voyage is not. Right now, the closest thing humanity maintains to a sealed life support world, the orbiting station where people live above the Earth, is not actually closed at all. It survives on a constant stream of resupply from below, fresh oxygen and water and food and parts lifted up from the planet again and again. The loop kept running only because the Earth is right there, a few hundred miles down, feeding it. Take away that resupply, and the station could not last. The one place humans currently live off the Earth stays alive only by staying tethered to it, and that is the plain measure of how far the species is from a truly closed world that can hold itself. A generation ship would have to do what no closed system ever has, hold its own balance, alone, for centuries. So the closed world cannot reliably hold the one thing every passenger needs every few seconds, the air in their lungs. That alone is a problem severe enough to doom a careless voyage. But the air is only the first of the things the box cannot hold, the most immediate, the one that kills fastest if it drifts. Behind it stand the others, the food that must be grown without fail for centuries, the water that must cycle without loss, the 1,000 systems that must be maintained, and behind all of those, the bodies of the people themselves, already under a strain that the failing air only compounds, bodies that the ship was supposed to protect and cannot, because the body was built for a world the ship can only pretend to be. Shift from the air to the flesh that breathes it, and look again at the spin. The cylinder turns, and the turning is not for show, it is the only thing manufacturing a downward pull for the bodies inside. The only thing standing between the crew and the slow wasting that weightlessness brings. There is no real gravity aboard a ship in the dark between the stars, no great mass beneath the feet to hold a body down. There is only the trick of rotation, the hull sweeping around fast enough that the people pressed against its inner surface feel flung outward against it, and read that flinging as weight, as a flaw, as down. The whole sense of an ordinary place inside the ship rests on that turning, and the turning is a fragile substitute for a real one. The body is the one piece of the ship that cannot be redesigned, and that is what makes it such a stubborn problem. Every other system can be engineered to fit the dark, the air scrubbers built for the task, the gardens shaped for the light, the hull cast for the cold. The body cannot. It arrives shaped by a planet, calibrated across millions of years to a specific pull, a specific shielding, a specific rhythm of day and night, and it cannot be recast for the ship the way a machine can. It can only be coaxed, braced, tricked into something like health by spinning the floor and thickening the walls and faking the sun, every measure a workaround for a body that was built for somewhere else. The ship can be made for the dark, the people inside it cannot, and so they remain, in every generation, slightly wrong for the place they live. Planetary animals housed in a vessel that can imitate a planet but never be one. It has to be done because the body, left in true weightlessness, falls apart. A body that no longer has to hold itself up against gravity stops maintaining the strength it no longer seems to need. The bones, sensing no load, begin to give up their mineral, thinning month by month, growing brittle. The muscles, including the great muscle of the heart, weaken and shrink without the constant work of fighting a planet's pull. Fluids that gravity normally draws downward pool instead in the chest and the head. The body, in short, was tuned by a planet, calibrated over millions of years to a steady downward pull, and when that pull is taken away, the body reads the absence as a signal to dismantle the very systems that gravity built. So the ship must spin to fake the pull, to give the bones and the muscles something to work against, to keep the bodies from quietly wasting across a lifetime in the dark. The body does not merely weaken in weightlessness, it actively dismantles itself, and the speed of it surprises everyone who studies it. Bone is not the dead scaffolding it appears to be, but a living tissue, constantly torn down and rebuilt, and the rebuilding is triggered in part by the load that gravity places on it. Take the load away, and the tearing down continues while the rebuilding slows, so that the skeleton begins to dissolve its own mineral into the blood, the bones growing porous and weak at a rate of more than 1 part in 100 every month. A few years of that, and a skeleton would be a fragile lattice, snapping under stresses it once shrugged off. The body reads the absence of weight as a message that the bones are no longer needed, and it begins, with terrible efficiency, to take them apart, reclaiming the mineral for other uses, hollowing out the frame that a planet spent a lifetime building. But the fake gravity is not the real thing, and the difference shows in the inner ear. Step into the spinning cylinder and follow what the turning does to a body that moves. The pull that holds a person to the floor comes from the rotation, and rotation plays tricks that true gravity never does. When a body stands still, the floor holds it down and all seems normal. But when the body moves, when a person turns their head, or stands up quickly, or climbs toward the center line of the ship where the spin is tighter, the rotation pushes back in strange sideways ways, nudging the fluid in the inner ear in directions that do not match what the eyes see or the body expects. The result is a deep and constant wrongness, a lurch with every motion, a queasy sense that the world is tilting when it should be still. A spin gentle enough and a ship wide enough could soften this, but only a truly enormous radius makes it disappear, miles across, larger than almost anything that could be built, and any ship smaller than that imposes on its people a faint perpetual seasickness, a body forever fighting a pull that does not behave. That is the spin gravity, a spinning carousel that fakes weight only while it turns. A child on a spinning playground wheel feels flung outward, pressed against the rail, and if the wheel spun fast enough and wide enough, that flinging could feel almost like weight. But let the child turn their head while the wheel spins and the inner ear rebels, the world swimming, the stomach lurching. Because the motion of the spin and the motion of the body do not agree. The ship is that carousel, made enormous and set turning in the dark, and the people aboard live their whole lives on it, standing in a weight that is really a flinging, their inner ears never fully at peace, every quick motion a small reminder that the floor beneath them is a trick of rotation and not the honest pull of a world. The pull is not even the same from head to foot, which is its own quiet wrongness. In real gravity, the pull is effectively uniform, the same at a person's head as at their feet, because a planet is so large that a body's height is nothing against it. In a spinning ship, the pull comes from the radius of the spin, and a standing body spans a real fraction of that radius, so the feet, farther from the center, feel a stronger pull than the head, nearer to it. A person standing in the cylinder is heavier at the feet than at the skull, the weight changing along the length of the body, and worse, raising an arm or lifting a load moves it through layers of differing pull, the limb growing lighter as it rises toward the center. Climb toward the axis and weight drains away with every step. Descend toward the hull and it returns. The body lives not in a steady weight but in a gradient, a pull that changes with height and with every motion, a gravity that never once behaves the way the body, shaped by a planet, expects gravity to behave. And the spin is only the gravity problem. Beyond the hull waits another assault the ship can never fully stop, the radiation of open space. Between the stars, and pouring out of the sun and every other star, stream high-energy particles, the bare nuclei of atoms moving at tremendous speed, and beyond them the harder radiation of the wider cosmos, particles flung from exploded stars and distant violent engines, crossing the dark in every direction. On the Earth, a thick atmosphere and a planet-wide magnetic field turn nearly all of this aside, a shield the body has lived behind for its entire evolutionary history. A ship in the dark has no atmosphere and no planet-sized magnetic field. It has only its hull, and a hull thick enough to stop the worst of the radiation is enormously heavy, and even a thick hull cannot stop all of it. Some of that radiation reaches the body's inside, every day, for a lifetime. What that radiation does, it does slowly and invisibly, atom by atom, deep inside the body. Each high-energy particle that passes through tissue can break the delicate molecules of a cell, can snap a strand of the DNA that carries the body's instructions, can leave damage that the cell must scramble to repair. A single such strike is nothing. The body repairs such damage constantly, but the radiation never stops, and across a lifetime of exposure, with no thick sky to hide behind, the damage accumulates, the broken strands and the misrepairs piling up, raising the lifelong risk of cancer, of cellular failure, of the slow corruption of the body's own blueprint. A brief mission, a few months in orbit, takes only a small dose. A life lived in the dark, and the lives of children born and raised there, take a dose no brief traveller ever faces, year upon year. The cosmos quietly editing the body's instructions one broken strand at a time. The danger reaches further than the body's living. It reaches into the children not yet conceived, into the very cells that carry the next generation forward. Radiation that strikes the reproductive cells can break and scramble the genetic instructions there, and those broken instructions, unlike the damage to an ordinary cell, do not die with the body that suffered them. They pass on. A mutation struck into a parent by a cosmic ray can become a flaw written into a child, and into that child's children, a permanent edit forced into the family line by a particle from an exploded star. Across generations of exposure, with no thick atmosphere to shield the breeding population, these forced edits accumulate in the inheritance itself, the cosmos slowly rewriting the script of the people aboard, layering radiation damage on top of the narrowing of the gene pool. Two separate corruptions of the same inheritance working at once, neither of which the ship can stop. Right now, the astronauts who return from only a few months aboard the orbiting station come back to the Earth diminished in ways that show how poorly the body travels. Their bones have thinned, having given up mineral in the months of weightlessness. Their hearts have weakened, having idled in the absence of a real pull. Their muscles have wasted, their balance gone strange, their bodies already, after only months, forgetting the gravity they grew up in. They recover, on the Earth, with the planet's pull to rebuild them and its sky to shield them. A generation aboard a ship would have neither. They would be born already in the diminished state, raised in the spin and the radiation, with no planet to return to and rebuild them, their bodies shaped from the first by a place the body was never meant to be. So the body can be braced and shielded and spun into a kind of fragile health, never quite right, never quite what a planet would make it, but functional, surviving, passing its diminished inheritance down to children born into the same turning box and the same thin rain of radiation. The body endures just. But there is one thing aboard the ship that cannot be braced or shielded or spun into health, one inheritance the ship has no way to protect, and it begins to fail from the very first generation, before a single child is even born to the second. The body the ship cannot fix is not the one standing in the spin. It is the deeper body, the shared body of the whole population, written in its genes, and the genes begin to narrow the moment the hatch seals. Draw back from the single body and look at the whole population at once, spread across the centuries of the voyage like a family tree, drawn out to dozens of branches. Every person aboard carries a copy of the human inheritance, the long coded script that builds a body, And the health of that script depends not on any one person, but on the variety held across all of them together. A population stays healthy because its members carry different versions of the script, so that the weak spots in one are covered by the strengths in another, the whole pool deep enough that no single flaw can spread to everyone. The gene pool of a ship is that depth, held in a sealed basin, and from the moment the ship launches it, is a pool that can only shrink. The basin only ever loses water, never gains it, and that is the whole shape of the danger. A pool fed by a stream can lose to evaporation and still hold its level, replenished as fast as it drains. The gene pool of a sealed ship has no stream. It is a basin filled once at launch and then sealed, and from that moment every loss is permanent, every variant that drifts out of the population gone for all the generations that follow, with nothing flowing in to replace it. Each generation evaporates a little more of the original depth, and the level falls, and it never rises because there is no source anywhere in the dark to feed it. A planet's population is a pool fed by the vast stream of all the people around it, always mixing, always replenished. A ship's population is a sealed basin under a slow sun, losing to the air a little each year, the water level dropping toward a floor below which nothing can live. This is the failure that compounds, and it is different in kind from the ones before it. The air was a problem of one moment, the body a problem of one lifetime, each of them a strain that a generation could endure and pass on. The narrowing of the gene pool is a problem that gathers force across all the lifetimes at once, accumulating generation upon generation, getting worse precisely because the voyage is long. Where the other failures hold roughly steady, this one deepens with every birth, the pool growing shallower as the centuries pass, the inheritance narrowing toward a point. Time, which heals so much on a planet, only deepens this wound. On the Earth, a small population that loses diversity can recover it, given enough generations, through the slow drift of mutation and the constant inflow of new blood from the wider world, time working to refill what was lost. Aboard the ship, time works only one way. There is no wider world to draw from, and the slow trickle of new mutation is far too feeble to replace what each generation strips away, and so every year of the voyage makes the problem worse rather than better, the opposite of healing. The longer the crossing, the more generations breed within the sealed pool, and the more generations breed within it, the shallower it grows. A short trip might end before the narrowing bites, but the trip is not short. It is the longest thing a population has ever endured, and every additional century of it drives the inheritance further down, time itself turned from a healer into the very thing that does the damage. The common assumption is the romantic one, the small brave crew. It imagines that a few hundred carefully chosen people, healthy and screened and diverse, would be more than enough to found a new branch of humanity on a distant world. A few hundred sounds like plenty. It is the size of a village, a community, a crowd. But a few hundred is not nearly enough, and the reason is written into the mathematics of inheritance. In a sealed population that small, with no one ever entering from outside, every generation must breed with the same narrow set of relatives, and with each generation the shared script grows more uniform, the variety bleeding out of it, the same versions repeating and combining until the rare flaws that variety once hid begin to surface and double and spread. The modelling of this is sobering and specific. A founding population of only a few hundred, carried across the dozens of generations a real interstellar crossing demands, loses the great majority of its genetic variety along the way, the pool narrowing until inherited disease, once rare, becomes common, until the population slides into the slow decline that comes from breeding too long within too small a circle. To avoid that fate, the serious estimates run far higher than intuition expects. The minimum founding population judged genetically safe across such a voyage runs into the tens of thousands, with a figure around 40,000 considered a sound and durable number, and a bare flaw, the smallest that might survive at all, sitting near 10,000. Below that, The pool is simply too shallow to last the crossing. The mechanism behind those numbers is the founder effect, and it works without mercy in a sealed pool. When a small group is cut off from a larger population, it carries only a fraction of the variety the whole once held, a random sample of the full inheritance, and whatever was not aboard at launch is gone for good, unrecoverable, absent from every generation that follows. From that already narrowed start, each generation of breeding within the closed group shuffles the same limited deck again and again, and chance alone steadily strips variance away, the pool growing more uniform with every hand dealt. Rare, harmful versions of genes that a large population keeps safely diluted begin, in the small one, to pair up and express themselves, surfacing as inherited disease at rates that climb across the generations. The sealed pool does not just fail to grow, it actively loses, every generation thinner than the last, the loss locked in and irreversible because no new variety can ever enter from outside. That number reframes the whole enterprise and tightens the trap. The romantic ship, the small crew of a few hundred, is revealed as a slow genetic death, a population that narrows and sickens and declines across the very centuries it must endure. But the safe ship, the one carrying 40,000, is a flying city, a sealed world holding the population of a town, needing food and air and water and space for 40,000 people maintained without fail for centuries, a structure so vast and so complex that no one has any idea how to build it, let alone how to keep it running across the lifetimes the voyage demands. The ship that is small enough to build is too small to stay healthy. The ship that is large enough to stay healthy is too large to build. The gene pool closes the trap that the air and the body began. There are ways to soften the trap, and each carries its own cost. The founders could carry not just living people, but a vast bank of frozen genetic material, stored eggs and sperm and embryos from tens of thousands of donors left behind, a library of diversity to be drawn on across the voyage to refresh the narrowing pool. It is the most plausible workaround anyone has proposed, and it might genuinely help, but it demands that the frozen library survive centuries of storage intact through every power fluctuation and equipment failure the voyage holds, and that each generation possess the knowledge and the will to use it correctly, and that a population sealed in a box accepts the strange and demanding social arrangements such a program would require, generation after generation, with no one alive who remembers agreeing to any of it. The fix is real, but it trades a genetic problem for a problem of machinery and knowledge and will, sustained without fail across the same centuries that wear down everything else aboard. There is a preview of this on the Earth, small and quiet and real. There are human communities that have lived for many generations in isolation, descended from a small number of founders, marrying within the same narrow group across the centuries, and in those communities the rare inherited diseases appear far more often than they do in the wider population, the same flaws surfacing again and again because the pool of variety the founders carried was too shallow to hide them for long. It is exactly the process a sealed ship would impose, only slower and milder, a glimpse in miniature of what a closed population does to itself across generations. The ship would do it to every soul aboard, with no wider population anywhere to marry back into, the narrowing total and the basin sealed. The cruelty is that screening cannot save a small pool, only slow its decline. The founders might choose their crew with great care, selecting for health and for the widest possible spread of genetic variety, packing the most diverse few hundred or few thousand the species can offer. It would help at the start. But screening can only select from what variety exists, and once the hatch is sealed, no screening can create new variety where the pool runs dry. Each generation can be guided, paired with care to spread the remaining diversity as widely as possible, and still the total only falls, because careful management of a shrinking resource is still the management of a shrinking resource. The founders can choose how fast the inheritance narrows, a little, but not whether it narrows. In a sealed pool, with no outside to draw from, the direction is fixed from the moment of launch, and only the speed of the decline remains to be argued over. Think of the gene pool as a fixed inheritance that can only be spent and never added to. A family that inherits a sum of money and can never earn or receive any more can only draw the balance down, spending across the generations until it thins toward nothing, each generation living on less than the one before, the account closing towards zero with no possible deposit. The gene pool of a sealed ship is that account. The founders bring the whole of it aboard at launch, every bit of variety the voyage will ever have, and from that moment it can only be spent, drawn down generation by generation, with no way to add to it, no new blood entering from any outside, the balance falling steadily toward the point where the inheritance can no longer cover the costs of building a healthy body. And so the narrowing of the blood is also, slowly, a narrowing of the people themselves. A population growing not just smaller in its variety, but more fragile in its bodies, more prone to the diseases the founders' diversity once held at bay. But the gene pool is only the part of the narrowing that can be measured. It can be charted, modelled, predicted, feared in numbers. The narrowing of the blood could at least be measured, charted and feared. The thing that happens next cannot be measured at all, and it is the failure that quietly undoes everything the voyage was ever for. Because a people sealed in a box, shrinking and fragile and centuries from any purpose they ever chose, does not only narrow in its blood, it narrows in its mind, in its memory, in its belief. And that narrowing has no number and no cure. Turn inward now, away from the bodies and the blood, into the quietest and most dangerous failure of all, the one that happens in the mind. Step into the curved chambers again, but this time see them through the eyes of a generation born deep into the crossing. A generation for whom the launch is not a memory, or even a story told by anyone they knew, but a fact in the records, as distant as ancient history. To them the ship is not a vessel going somewhere, it is the world. The metal sky overhead, the curved floor, the artificial lights rising and dimming to mark a day that was chosen by the dead, all of it is simply the way things are and have always been, the only reality they have ever known or will ever know. This failure leaves no mark on any instrument. The thinning air shows on a gauge, the wasting bone shows on a scan, the narrowing blood shows in the rising count of inherited disease. Every physical failure announces itself somewhere in the ship's readings, a number that can be watched and feared. The failure of meaning shows on nothing. There is no dial that measures belief, no sensor that registers the slow draining of purpose from a population, no alarm that sounds when a generation quietly stops caring where the ship is going. It happens entirely in the invisible space of what people feel and value and pass to their children, the one region of the ship no monitor can reach, and because it cannot be measured, it cannot be caught early or corrected by maintenance the way a failing scrubber can. It simply happens silently, generation by generation, until one day the voyage is being carried by people who no longer believe in it, and nothing anywhere in the ship's data will ever have shown the moment it began. This is the failure that has no number, and it is worse than any of the physical ones, because it dissolves the reason for all the rest. Every problem so far has been a problem of matter, of air and bone and gene, the kind of thing that can at least be measured and engineered against, however poorly. This is a problem of meaning, and meaning cannot be engineered. The mission itself, the whole purpose of the voyage, the destination that justified the sealing of a world and the spending of generations, exists only in the minds of the people carrying it, and minds change across centuries in ways no hull can contain. The founding purpose, passed down a long enough chain of people who never chose it and never saw its point, does not survive the trip intact. It thins and drifts and finally dissolves, and when it dissolves the voyage continues with nothing left at its centre. The common assumption is that the crew would hold fast to the founding goal, that the dream of the new world would be passed faithfully from parent to child, down the whole length of the voyage, a shared purpose burning steadily across the generations, but a goal chosen by people long dead, for a world no living person has ever seen, defended by generations who gain nothing from it in their own lives, is among the most fragile things imaginable. The founders chose the mission and believed in it, but the founders are dust within the first stretch of the voyage. The generations in the deep middle inherit the mission the way a person inherits a debt they did not incur, an obligation handed down from strangers pointing at a reward none of them will live to collect. Asked to spend their whole lives maintaining a fragile machine, suffering the thin air and the strange gravity and the narrowing blood, all for the sake of a landfall that will happen, if it happens at all, generations after their own deaths, for the benefit of people not yet born. It is no surprise that the belief wears thin. The deeper trouble is that the middle generations have every reason to question the voyage, and almost none to sustain it. The founders chose hardship for a purpose they believed in. The arrivers, if they come, will at least reach the end and claim whatever waits, but the generations in the deep middle are asked to bear all the cost of the voyage: the thin air, the strange gravity, the narrowing blood, the sealed and shrinking world, and to receive in return absolutely nothing: no landfall, no new sky, no reward of any kind within their own lives, only the duty to keep the machine running and to raise children who will inherit the same duty and the same absence of reward. A purpose that asks everything and offers nothing, handed down by the dead to people who never agreed to it, is not a purpose that holds. It is a weight, and weights are set down, and a generation that quietly sets down the founding purpose does not even need to rebel against it. They need only stop believing it matters and live in the world as they find it. They were not travelling to a world. They were born in the only world there was, a turning room of metal and light. And to the children of the deep crossing, the destination was not a place at all, but a story the dead had told, about a shore no living eye had ever seen. The ship was not carrying them somewhere. The ship was the somewhere, and it always had been. Sit with that, because it is the hinge the whole story turns on. For the founders, the ship was a means, a vessel that would carry their descendants to a destination, a thing that pointed beyond itself. For the generations in the deep middle, the ship is not a means to anything. It is the world, complete and sufficient, the only home there is, and a home does not need a destination to justify it. A person does not ask where their world is going. They simply live in it. And so the destination, which was the entire reason the world was built and set in motion, quietly stops being a destination at all and becomes instead a strange old story, a thing the ancestors believed, a ritual word repeated without the belief that once filled it. The voyage continues. The ship holds its heading. The systems are maintained, but the purpose at the center of it has gone hollow, and a voyage with a hollow center is no longer a voyage. It is just a world, moving, for reasons no one alive quite feels anymore. A home does not justify itself by where it is going, and that is exactly why the ship as home is so corrosive to the ship as vessel. A person living in a house does not lie awake demanding to know the house's destination, because a house is not going anywhere. A house is simply where life happens. The moment the ship becomes home in that full sense, the moment it stops being a thing the passengers are riding and becomes the world they are living in, the question of destination quietly loses its grip. The crossing continues in the machinery, in the locked heading and the running systems, but it stops continuing in the only place that ever really held it, the minds of the people aboard. A vessel needs its crew to believe in the journey. A home needs nothing but to be lived in, and a generation ship, given enough time, always becomes the second thing, which means it always, given enough time, stops being the first. This is the third return to the image of the cylinder, and the meaning has turned all the way around. At the start it was a vessel seen from outside, a lit shape crossing the dark toward a star, plainly going somewhere. Now it is seen from the inside out, through the eyes of people, for whom there is no outside that matters, no star ahead that means anything, no world behind that was ever real. The cylinder has stopped being a ship in their understanding and become the whole of existence, the walls not the edge of a vehicle, but the edge of reality itself. The same turning cylinder, the same crossing, and the people inside it no longer believe they are crossing anything at all, because to believe in the crossing they would have to believe in two worlds they have never seen, and belief in the unseen, stretched across enough generations, simply fades. Consider how a message degrades when whispered down a long line of people. The first person speaks it clearly, with full understanding of what it means and why it matters. The second receives it slightly altered, the third more altered still, and by the time it has passed through dozens of mouths and dozens of minds, each one understanding a little less of the original intent, the message that arrives at the end bears little resemblance to the one that began. The words perhaps still spoken, but the meaning drained out of them, a phrase repeated by people who no longer know why. The mission of a generation ship is that whispered message, passed down not through dozens of people, but through dozens of generations, each one further from the founder's understanding, each one adding its own drift, until the purpose that arrives in the deep middle of the voyage is a hollow echo, spoken perhaps in ceremonies, written perhaps in the records, but no longer believed in the way the founders believed, no longer felt as a living reason to endure. No human institution has ever survived the kind of time this requires. Consider the plain fact of it. No nation has held its borders and its character unchanged across the dozens of generations such a crossing demands. No faith has passed down its beliefs without splitting and drifting and transforming across that much time. No language has stayed intelligible to its own distant descendants over such a span, the words shifting, the meanings sliding, until the speech of the ancestors becomes a foreign tongue. Every human institution that has ever existed has been remade beyond recognition across the kind of time a generation ship must endure. And there is no reason to think the mission of a ship would be the single exception, the one human purpose that holds firm where every nation and faith and language has drifted. The mission will change, the mission will fade, the mission, almost certainly, will be forgotten or transformed into something its founders would not recognize long before the ship arrives. And the records themselves are no guarantee, because records require readers who care. The founders might fill the ship's archives with everything: the full history of the mission, the images of the home world, the careful explanation of the destination, and the reasons for the voyage, a complete account preserved against forgetting. But an archive is only as alive as the attention paid to it, and a generation that has stopped believing in the destination has little reason to study the records that point toward it. The archive becomes a vault of old data that no one consults, a library in a language the living no longer feel, present but inert, the full truth of the voyage sitting untouched in storage while the people aboard live in a present that has quietly detached from it. Knowledge does not preserve purpose. A people can possess the complete record of why they set out, and still, across enough generations, simply cease to care what it says, the meaning gone even as the words remain perfectly intact. And here is the cruelty folded inside that. The ship does not need anyone to believe in the destination in order to reach it. It holds its heading whether the crew remembers why or not. The systems run, the hull turns, the course stays locked toward the distant star, indifferent to whether a single soul aboard still wants to go there. So the ship will arrive, or will pass near its destination, whether or not anyone aboard still believes there is a destination at all, carrying a population that has forgotten the point of its own voyage toward a world it no longer dreams of. And the arrival, when it comes, may be the one thing crueler than the crossing itself, because what waits at the end is not the bright new dawn the founders imagined. What waits is a shore that may have moved, a promise made from old light, a destination that the long crossing itself may have placed forever out of reach. Leave the interior at last and turn the camera forward, past the bow of the ship, out along its heading to the thing it has been aimed at for centuries, the destination, the target world, growing slowly larger in the ship's instruments after lifetimes of crossing. For the whole voyage it has been a point of light, a single pixel of hope, a planet picked out from across the dark and trusted to be waiting. Now finally near, it begins to resolve into a disk, a world with features, And with that resolving comes the dawning recognition of what it actually is. And what it actually is may bear little resemblance to the promise that launched the ship. The voyage assumed a fixed and waiting prize, a known world holding still at the end of the line, ready to receive the arrivers and reward the whole long sacrifice. That assumption now comes apart. The prize was never known. It was guessed from a distance, from light, and the crossing itself may have ruined the guess. The destination was always a target chosen under deep uncertainty, and the centuries of travel only deepened it, so that the ship arrives not at a confirmed haven, but at a question mark, a world it bet everything on while knowing almost nothing about it for certain. And the ship cannot easily change its mind on arrival. A vessel that has spent centuries crossing the dark arrives carrying enormous speed, and shedding that speed to actually stop at a world is its own brutal problem, demanding nearly as much energy as the original acceleration, a second impossibility stacked on the first. A ship that cannot slow down does not arrive at a world. It flashes past it in hours, after centuries of travel, with no way to stop and no way to return. And even a ship that can slow has committed everything to a single target chosen long ago, with no fuel and no time to divert to a better one if the chosen world proves false. The destination was locked at launch, a single guess the whole voyage is bound to, and there is no changing course at the end, no shopping among worlds, no second chance. The ship arrives where it was aimed, at what it was aimed at, and takes whatever is actually there, because by then there is no other option left. The common assumption is that the destination is a known, waiting, habitable world, a sure reward at the end of the trip, a planet confirmed in advance to hold air and water and a surface a body could walk on. But the truth of how such a world is chosen undoes that certainty. The target is picked from light gathered by telescopes before the ship ever launched, light that itself took years to cross the gap and arrive. The image the founders aimed at was therefore already old when they chose it, a portrait of the world as it was years before launch, and by the time the ship arrives centuries later, the picture the founders trusted is centuries out of date on top of that. The ship is aimed not at the world as it is, but at the world as it appeared in old light, a guess built on a delay, and the real world waiting at the end may differ from that guess in ways no telescope could ever have caught. Step to the ship's forward instruments as the target finally resolves, and follow the recognition as it lands. For centuries, the world ahead was a single steady point, trusted, aimed at, the fixed star of the whole mission. Now, near enough at last to see as a disk, it shows itself, and the light that reveals it is the same kind of old light the founders trusted, gathered and read by instruments that can only ever see the world as it was when the light left it. The portrait the founders chose was painted in light that departed the planet before the ship was ever built, a likeness already generations stale at the moment of launch, and now centuries staler still. The world swinging into view may match that ancient portrait, or it may not. It may have weather the portrait never showed, a surface scoured by its star, an air gone wrong, a face entirely unlike the promise that set the voyage in motion, and there was never any way, across all those light years, to know for certain which. For the people aboard, the resolving world is the first new thing to enter their sky in lifetimes, and it arrives as a stranger rather than a home. Generations have lived and died with the destination as nothing but a fixed point of data, a coordinate in the navigation, a word in the old records. Now it swells into a real disk with real features, clouds perhaps, or the glint of water, or the dead grey of bare rock, and the living must reckon with the thing their ancestors aimed at, a world they were taught to call the purpose of everything, appearing at last and looking like nothing they have ever known. They have never seen open ground, they have never seen a horizon that falls away, instead of curving up. The world growing in the instruments is supposedly their inheritance, the reason for every sealed life behind them, and it looks, to eyes raised in a metal cylinder, as alien and frightening as the dark itself. The dangers hidden in that uncertainty are specific and real. A world can sit in the comfortable zone around its star, the band where liquid water is possible, and still be lethal in ways no distant telescope could rule out. It may have no atmosphere at all, its air stripped away long ago. It may be drenched in radiation from a star that flares violently, sterilizing its surface again and again. It may be locked with one face always to its star, one side burning and the other frozen. It may simply be wrong in some way that only arrival reveals, a world that looked like a haven from light years off, and turns out, up close, to be a tomb. The ship bet everything on a guess made from old light, and the guess cannot be checked until the betting is long over, and the arrivers are already there. Even the most basic question, whether the target world holds breathable air, cannot be answered for certain from light years away. A world's air can be studied a little by the way it bends and filters the light of its star, a faint chemical signature read across the dark, but that reading is crude, uncertain, and easily misjudged, and it cannot rule out the 100 ways a world can look promising and prove deadly. A planet might show signs of an atmosphere and still hold a surface pressure that would crush or suffocate, a chemical mix that would poison, a temperature that would freeze or bake. The founders must choose their destination knowing that the most they can say of it is that it might, possibly, from a great distance, be the kind of place a body could survive, and that the only way to truly know is to send a sealed world full of lives across centuries of dark to find out, by arriving, whether the guess was right or fatal. The nearest such world humanity actually knows is a sharp example of the gamble. Proxima Centauri b, a planet circling the nearest star, sits in its star's habitable zone, the band where water might be liquid, and for that reason it stands as the most natural first destination anyone could name. But the star it circles is a red dwarf prone to violent flares, lashing the little world with bursts of radiation that may have stripped its air and scoured its surface, and from 4 light years off there is no way to see its true face, no way to know whether it holds a breathable sky or a sterilized rock. It is the best candidate there is, the nearest possible shore, and it remains a hope rather than a promise, a world that might be a haven or might be a trap, unknowable until something arrives to find out. The flares are the cruelest part, because they turn the very thing that makes the world a candidate into the thing that may have killed it. A planet must sit close to a small cool star like Proxima to be warm enough for liquid water, close enough that the star's warmth can reach it, and that closeness is what puts it in the so-called habitable zone in the first place. But a small cool star is a violent one, prone to sudden enormous flares, and a world close enough to be warmed is also close enough to be lashed by every outburst, bathed again and again in bursts of radiation that can strip an atmosphere away over time and scour a surface sterile. The same nearness that might make the world warm enough to live on may be exactly what has rendered it dead. The habitable zone around such a star is not a guarantee of habitability at all, only of the right temperature, and the right temperature beside a flaring star may come at the price of everything else a living world would need. Think of the target world as a coastline charted once from far out at sea. A navigator glimpses a distant shore through a telescope, sketches its outline, marks it as a safe harbour, and sets a course that will take generations to complete. But the chart is made from a single distant glimpse, and by the time the vessel finally reaches the coast, the sketch is impossibly old, and coastlines change. The harbour the navigator drew may have silted up, or been swallowed by storm, or never been quite as the distant glimpse suggested. The chart was the best that could be made from far away, and it was never a promise, only a guess drawn in old light, and the vessel that trusted it arrives to find whatever is actually there, which may be nothing like the drawing that set its course. There is a final cruelty layered onto the uncertain shore, and it belongs to the arrivers themselves. Suppose the world is everything the founders hoped, a true haven with breathable air and standing water and solid ground beneath an open sky. The people who arrive to claim it would be the product of centuries of adaptation to a spinning metal world, bodies shaped by the artificial gravity and the thin managed air and the narrow gene pool, minds shaped by a lifetime within curved walls under an artificial day, A planet under an open sky with real gravity and weather, and a horizon that does not curve upward, with distances and spaces no ship ever held, might be as alien and unsurvivable to them as the dark itself. Their bodies and their expectations fitted to the box so completely that the very prize they arrive at is a place they can no longer live. The ship may reach a habitable world and carry a population that has become unfit to inhabit anything but the ship. So going slow traps the crew in a failing world aimed at an uncertain shore. Every system inside the ship running down across the centuries, while the destination at the end remains a guess that may have curdled into a trap. The obvious escape from all of it is speed. To cross the gap fast enough that a single crew makes the trip, sparing all those generations, reaching the shore while the chart is still fresh and the bodies still fit. There is a way to do exactly that, a way to cross the dark in a single lifetime and skip the generations entirely. And it would tear the ship to pieces. Now drive the ship fast, strip away the slow crawl and the centuries and the generations, and imagine the vessel pushed instead to a real fraction of the speed of light, fast enough to cross the gap to the nearest star within a single human life. The whole nightmare of the sealed and failing world skipped over in one bold acceleration. The interior calms, the generations vanish from the problem, and the empty dark ahead, the void that seemed like nothing, the clear open road, transforms into something no shield can survive. For a moment, the fast ship looks like the answer to everything the slow ship suffered. No dozens of generations sealed in a box, no gene pool narrowing across the centuries, no mission dissolving in the minds of people who never chose it, no bodies wasting in a borrowed gravity for lifetimes. A single crew boards, crosses in years rather than ages, and steps out at the far end. The whole generational nightmare collapsed into one human lifetime. Every horror the slow crossing inflicts comes from the length of it, and speed appears to cut the length away at a stroke. That is why the fast ship is the first thing anyone reaches for, the obvious escape, the clean way out of the trap, and it is exactly that hope the physics of speed takes apart, because the same velocity that shortens the years turns the empty road itself into the thing that kills. The whole slow ship horror existed only because the fast alternative is worse, and this is where that becomes clear. The reason no one simply builds a fast ship and spares the generations is not only that the energy is beyond reach, it is that the void itself turns lethal at speed. Space looks empty, and at a walking pace it may as well be, but it is not truly empty, and the difference between empty enough and not empty enough depends entirely on how fast a thing moves through it. The slow ship can ignore what the fast ship cannot, because the same thin scattering of matter that a crawling vessel drifts harmlessly through becomes, at a fraction of light speed, a barrage that no hull can endure. The common assumption is that space is empty, so a fast ship would have a clear run, nothing to hit, nothing to slow it, a clean straight shot through the dark. But interstellar space is not empty. It is thinly filled with a sparse haze of gas, single atoms scattered through the void, and here and there a grain of dust, a mote smaller than anything the eye could see. At rest, or at any ordinary speed, these are nothing, so faint and so far apart that a ship could cross light years and gather only a trace of them. The danger is not in what they are, the danger is in what speed does to them, because energy of motion climbs with the square of the speed, and at a large fraction of light speed, even a single atom, even a single grain, arrives carrying a violence out of all proportion to its size. The emptiness is real, but it is not perfect, and the imperfection is all that matters at speed. Interstellar space holds, on average, only about one atom in each small volume that on the Earth would hold uncountable trillions, a thinness so extreme that it makes the best vacuum ever produced in a laboratory look crowded. By every standard of ordinary experience, it is nothing, a void, an absence. But a ship crossing light years passes through an enormous length of that thin medium, sweeping up the sparse atoms and the rare grains across trillions of miles, and at a fraction of light speed each one it meets arrives with violence. The total mass the ship gathers across the whole crossing is small, perhaps a fraction of a gram of dust against the leading face over a lifetime of travel. But that fraction of a gram does not arrive gently or all at once. It arrives one grain at a time, each grain a separate blow delivered at a fraction of light speed, and a fraction of a gram delivered that way, spread across years of relentless impacts, is enough to grind a hull to ruin. Move the camera to the leading face of a ship driven to 1/10 of the speed of light, and watch what the empty dark actually does to it. A single grain of interstellar dust, a speck too small to see, far smaller than a grain of sand, waits in the ship's path, drifting and harmless. The ship meets it at 1/10 of light speed. In that instant, the speck is not a speck. It strikes the forward hull, carrying the kinetic energy of a heavy truck barreling down a highway, all of it delivered into a point smaller than a pinhead. A flash of light and a burst of vaporized metal, a crater blown into the shield. Then another, the thin scattering of dust that a slow ship would never have noticed arrives, at speed as a relentless barrage, grain after grain hammering the leading face of the ship. Each impact a small bomb, the empty void revealed as a shooting gallery the ship must endure, not for a moment, but for the entire crossing. And between the grains, the thin gas itself, the scattered single atoms, comes streaming into the hull as a flood of hard radiation, the harmless haze of the void, turned by sheer speed into a sleet of ionizing particles against the front of the ship, frying anything that is not buried deep behind heavy shielding. The numbers behind that violence hold up to the harshest scrutiny. A single microscopic grain of interstellar dust, struck at 1/10 of the speed of light, carries the energy of a 10-ton truck at highway speed, concentrated into a point, push the ship faster to 1/5 or 1/3 of light speed to shorten the trip further, and the energy of each impact climbs steeply higher, single grains arriving with the force of bombs, the leading face of the ship taking blow after blow that would crater armor. No realistic shield survives that barrage, intact across the years of a fast crossing. A shield thick enough to absorb it would be impossibly massive, and even then it would be slowly eaten away, grain by grain, blow by blow, the ship grinding itself to pieces against the thin matter of a void that only looked empty. And the radiation problem rides alongside the impacts, just as deadly and harder to stop. At a large fraction of light speed, the thin gas of interstellar space, the scattered single atoms that fill the void, no longer drift gently past the ship. They slam into its leading face as a stream of particles moving at a fraction of light speed, and a particle moving that fast is by definition radiation, hard ionizing radiation, of exactly the kind that tears through tissue and breaks the molecules of life. The faster the ship flies, the more energetic this headwind becomes, the harmless haze of empty space, transformed by sheer speed into a continuous blast of radiation against the bow, sleeting through anything not buried behind heavy shielding, frying electronics, killing cells, a flood of lethal energy generated by nothing more than the ship's own velocity through a void that at rest holds almost nothing at all. To go fast is to manufacture, out of empty space itself, a radiation source aimed directly at the front of the ship. Think of a single grain of dust at speed as a fastball thrown with the energy of a loaded truck. A pitcher's fastball carries a sting, because a small hard thing moving fast packs real energy into a small space. Now load that small hard thing with the energy not of a thrown arm, but of a truck at full speed on a highway, and concentrate it into a point smaller than a seed, and throw it at the front of the ship. Then throw another, then throw a stadium's worth of them, every second for years on end, the ship driving forward into an endless rising barrage of these truck force pitches, each one cratering the hull where it lands. That is what a fast crossing actually is. Not a clean run through emptiness, but a years-long drive into a hail of microscopic bombs that no armor can fully turn aside. Right now, the sun and everything near it sit inside a sparse region of the galaxy, a bubble of thinner gas and dust, blown clear long ago by an exploded star, a comparatively empty pocket in an already empty void. Even here, in this cleared bubble, the thin matter is enough. A ship driven fast enough to cross even this sparse region quickly would still meet enough dust and gas to shred its leading face, the emptiest neighborhood the galaxy offers, still not empty enough to allow a fast crossing to survive. And beyond the bubble, in the denser reaches between, the barrage would only be worse, the sleet thicker, the impacts more frequent, the void less forgiving the farther the ship pushed into it. So the choice closes on both sides, and the closing is the whole brutal point. Go slow, and the world inside the ship decays, its air drifting, its bodies failing, its blood narrowing, its mission dissolving across the generations the slow crossing demands. Go fast, and the world outside the ship destroys it, the void itself turning to a barrage that grinds the hull to nothing across the years of a quick crossing. There is no speed that escapes both fates. The slow road kills from within, and the fast road kills from without, and the dark allows no third road between them. Which means the generations were never a design flaw, to be engineered away. They were the only door the universe left open. The single way across that does not end in immediate destruction. And that door leads into the failing sealed world, and everything that happens inside it. A destination no one would choose if any other door existed, and none does. There is a narrow band of speed where neither fate is immediately fatal, fast enough to outpace the worst of the generational decay, but slow enough to survive the barrage, and even that band is a kind of trap rather than an escape. A ship threading it would still take centuries to cross, still seal generations into the box, still face the drifting air and the narrowing blood, only somewhat compressed. It would still meet enough dust and gas to scar and erode its leading face, only somewhat less savagely. The middle road is not a road around the problem, but a blending of both problems. A ship that decays a little less because it travels a little faster, and is shredded a little less because it travels a little slower, suffering reduced measures of both fates, rather than escaping either. There is no speed that is clean. Every speed pays in decay or in destruction or in a measure of both, and the only question is the mix of the two, never whether the price is paid at all. Let the camera pull back one last time, far back and slow, until the cylinder is small against the deep dark and the whole of its long crossing can be held in a single view. It is still there, still lit, still turning, still holding its heading toward a star that has grown only a little nearer across all these lifetimes, and seen whole across the length of the voyage. Every separate failure the story has traced reveals itself as one failure wearing many faces. The drifting air, the wasting body, the narrowing blood, the dissolving mission. They are not 4 problems or 5. They are one, the single slow truth of what a sealed world is. The degradation shows everywhere by now, in 1,000 small surrenders. The hull, scarred by 100 years and more of micrometeoroid strikes and the thin abrasion of the medium, is patched and patched again, each repair a little cruder than the last as the original materials run low. The systems that scrub the air and cycle the water run a little less cleanly than they did, tuned and retuned by hands that learnt the work from hands that learnt it from the founders, each transmission losing a little of the original understanding. Parts wear and are replaced by parts cannibalized from elsewhere, the ship slowly eating itself to stay alive, robbing its own less vital systems to keep the vital ones running. Nothing has failed outright. Everything works after a fashion, but everything works a little worse than it did, the whole vast machine settling into a slow general decline, held together by diminishing knowledge and dwindling spares, running down not in any single dramatic failure, but in 10,000 small ones at once. This is the largest widening, the one that swallows all the others. Each failure was presented in its turn as a distinct threat, a separate thing the ship could not hold, and each was real. But step back far enough and they merge, because they all flow from a single source. A closed world is a thing running on a fixed and dwindling store of order, sealed off from the only thing that could replenish it, and everything inside it that drifts or wastes or narrows or dissolves is simply that one store running down in a different register. The air thins because the order that kept it balanced is being spent. The bodies fail because the order that a planet maintains in them is no longer supplied. The blood narrows because the variety the founders brought aboard can only be drawn down. The mission dissolves because the shared purpose, too, was a kind of order, and order, in a sealed world, only ever decreases. It is all one failure, the running down of a closed world cut off from the only world that could sustain it. The common assumption was the gentlest one of all, that the Ark carries life safely across the dark, a vessel of preservation, a guarantor of the future. The reality is the reverse. The Ark does not preserve, it runs down. A closed world is a scrap of order sealed in a can and set adrift. And order sealed away from any source does not hold. It dissipates, slowly, inevitably, in every direction at once, because that is what closed things do. The ship is not a fortress against the decay of the dark. It is a small parcel of borrowed order, spending itself across the centuries, and the longer the voyage, the more completely it spends, until what arrives, if anything arrives, is not the bright cargo that launched, but the worn-down remnant of a world that was failing the entire way. Order is the thing the dark is always taking, everywhere, from everything, and a closed world is simply a thing trying to hold its order with no way to renew it. Heat flows from hot to cold, structure crumbles toward formlessness, the arranged drifts toward the random, and this drift is not a flaw in any particular machine, but the deepest tendency of the universe itself, the slow slide of everything towards sameness and disorder. A living world holds itself against that slide only by constantly spending energy, paying the running cost of staying ordered, and the energy must come from somewhere. On the Earth it comes from the sun, an endless flood paying the bill every second. On a ship it comes from a fixed store carried at launch, and a fixed store spent against an endless tendency can only run down. The ship is not failing because it was built badly. It is failing because holding order against the dark costs energy, and the ship carries only so much, and the voyage asks for more than it carries. There is exactly one closed world humanity knows of that actually works, that has carried life across the dark for ages without running down, and it is not a ship, it is the Earth. The Earth is a sealed world too, in its way, a finite globe carrying every living thing through the same black, with no resupply from anywhere, its air and water and life all cycling within a closed boundary. And it works. It has worked for billions of years. But it works for two reasons no ship can copy. It is vast, almost beyond comprehension, a whole planet's worth of air and ocean and rock, so enormous that its cycles are deep enough and redundant enough to absorb any local drift. And it is bathed, every moment, in the endless energy of a nearby star, a constant flood of power pouring in from the sun that drives the cycles and pays the running cost of keeping order against decay. A ship is neither vast nor fed. It is a scrap of the Earth's mass, sealed in a can, with a fixed store of energy and no star to bathe it. And a sealed scrap of a world cannot do what the whole world does. The Earth's cycles are deep in a way no ship could match. When a forest falls, others stand. When one species fails, the web holds through 1,000 others. The air is balanced not by a single delicate mechanism, but by oceans and forests and the slow breathing of the whole living crust, an immense redundancy built up over billions of years so that no local failure can tip the whole. A ship has none of that depth. Its air is balanced by a few systems and a few gardens, its margins thin, its redundancy shallow, every cycle a single point of failure with little behind it. Where the Earth absorbs a shock the way an ocean absorbs a stone, the ship rings like struck glass, every disturbance running through the whole of its small closed world, with nothing to dampen it. The Earth holds because it is deep, the ship cannot hold because it is shallow, a thin imitation of a planet's cycles, with none of a planet's vast forgiving mass behind them. Think of the ship as a single note struck at the moment of launch. A note sounded on a string or in a bell is at its fullest the instant it is struck, and from that instant it fades, the energy bleeding away into the air, the sound thinning and dying because nothing is feeding it, because a struck note carries only the energy of the striking and spends it as it sounds. The ship is that note. At launch it holds the fullest store of order it will ever have, every system fresh, every tank full, the air balanced, the gene pool deep, the mission burning bright. And from that instant it fades, all of it, the order bleeding away in every register at once, the note dying slowly across the centuries, and there is no hand anywhere in the dark that can strike it again, no way to renew what is spent, only the long diminishing of a sound that was loudest at the very beginning and has been fading ever since. The sun pays the Earth's bill in a currency the ship simply does not have. Every second the sun pours out energy, and a sliver of it falls on the Earth, and that constant flood is what drives the winds and lifts the water and feeds the plants and runs the whole vast machinery of a living world, paying the running cost of order against the dark with an income that never stops. The Earth is not a closed system spending a fixed store. It is a system bathed in endless power, an account refilled faster than it can be drained, and that is the entire secret of why it holds. The ship has left the sun behind. Out in the dark between the stars, there is no flood of energy falling on the hull, only the fixed store carried at launch, and whatever feeble trickle the ship can wring from it. The Earth lives because it is paid continuously by a star. The ship dies because it carries its wages in a sealed purse and spends them the whole way down. This is the fourth time the cylinder has turned across the story, and now it turns against deep time itself. At the start it was a vessel on a journey, plainly going somewhere. Then a fragile turning world holding its people against the dark. Then a sealed reality whose passengers had forgotten the point of the crossing. Now it is something starker, a closed parcel of failing order set against the enormous indifferent dark. Still lit, still turning, still crossing, but understood at last for what it is, a thing running down on a fixed store, spending the last of its launch day order across a voyage longer than the order can last. The origin world and the target world are both abstractions now, equally distant, equally unreal to the people aboard. The ship is the whole of reality for everyone it carries, and the whole of that reality is quietly failing. Right now, the Earth itself is carrying every living thing through the same dark, on the same kind of voyage, a closed world of finite stores crossing the black around the galaxy's center, holding its air and its water and its life within a sealed boundary the same way a ship would. The only difference is a size and the star. The Earth is vast where a ship is small, and the Earth is fed by the sun where a ship is fed by nothing, and those two differences are the whole of why the Earth holds and a ship would not. But the kind of thing they are is the same. A closed world, running on what it has, crossing the dark. The ship is only the Earth made small and cut off from its star, and watching the ship fail is watching, in miniature and sped up, what any closed world does when it is too small to absorb its own drift and too far from any star to pay its own way. Come all the way back in now, past the deep time and the failing systems, down to the smallest scale the story holds, a single life inside the cylinder. Not the founders who launched the ship, not the arrivers who may someday reach the shore, but one ordinary person somewhere in the vast middle of the voyage, born into the turning world, living a whole life within it, and dying within it, having touched neither the world left behind, nor the world aimed at. This is the true population of the voyage, and the whole weight of the story rests on them. The middle generations are the ones no version of the story remembers. The founders are honoured in the telling as the bold ones who left, the visionaries who gave up a world. The arrivers are imagined as the triumphant ones who land, the heirs who claim the prize. Both ends of the voyage get a name and a meaning. The middle gets neither. The dozens of generations between the launch and the landfall have no role in the heroic story at all, no departure to be praised for, and no arrival to be celebrated, only the long, unwitnessed labour of keeping the ship alive across the dark. They are the unremembered majority, the people the story skips over to get from the brave beginning to the hoped-for end. And they are also, in plain fact, almost everyone the voyage will ever hold. The tale of the Ark is told as if it belonged to its edges, and it is lived, almost entirely, in the middle that the tale forgets. The final implication is the one that has been waiting under everything, and it is a matter of who actually pays. The hopeful version of the Ark imagines the suffering belonging to the bold founders, who sacrifice nobly, and the reward belonging to the lucky arrivers, who claim the new world. But the founders die in hope, early, having known the launch and believed in the destination, their sacrifice at least chosen and meaningful to them. And the arrivers, if any arrive, claim whatever is actually there, ruin or heaven, at the very end. Between them lies the vast middle, dozens of generations, the overwhelming majority of every person who will ever live aboard the ship, and they neither chose the voyage, nor will see its end. The suffering belongs to them, the unchosen middle, the people the Ark was never really for. There is a word for a vessel that carries the living sealed inside it, across a great dark, toward a destination they will not reach in any form they would recognize, and the word is not Ark. An Ark saves, an Ark carries life through the flood and sets it down whole on the far shore, the same life that entered, delivered intact. The generation ship does not do that. The life that enters is not the life that arrives. The founders who seal the hatch are dust within the first stretch. The people who might step out at the far end, if any do, share almost nothing with them but the walls. What the ship actually carries across the dark is not a cargo of lives preserved, but a chain of lives consumed, each generation spent to move the next a little farther along, the voyage feeding on the people inside it, the way a fire feeds on fuel, advancing only by burning what it holds. It is not a vessel that saves its passengers, it is a vessel that spends them and calls the spending a journey. Follow one of them, from first breath to last, entirely inside the cylinder. A child is born in the turning world, in a chamber under artificial light, on a curved floor that rises away on both sides. The child learns to walk in corridors of metal, learns a sky that is a hull, learns a day that brightens and dims because machines decide it should. The child grows, takes up the work of keeping the ship alive, tending the gardens that make the air, maintaining the systems that hold the balance, because every hand is needed and there is no other work and no other place. The person marries within the small sealed population, raises children who will do the same, grows old in the only world there is, and dies, and is recycled. Their matter returned to the closed loops of the ship, because nothing can be wasted, their atoms folded back into the gardens and the air for the next generation to breathe. A whole human life, complete, birth to death, lived inside a corridor between two worlds. The person never once seeing the world their ancestors left, or the world their descendants might reach, the metal sky, the only sky they ever knew. Even the recycling that keeps such a person alive carries the weight of the box. Nothing aboard can be wasted, because nothing can be replaced, and so the loops are closed as tightly as the systems allow. The water a person drinks has passed through countless bodies before them, and will pass through countless after. The air they breathe has been breathed by their ancestors, and will be breathed by their descendants, and when a person dies, their body itself returns to the loops, broken down and folded back into the soil of the gardens, their matter feeding the plants that feed the next generation. Because the ship cannot afford to lose even the atoms of its dead. It is not cruelty, only arithmetic, the brutal arithmetic of a closed world where every atom must serve again and again. But it means that a life aboard the ship is woven into the matter of the ship more completely than any life on a planet. The same atoms cycling through generation after generation, the dead never truly leaving, only rejoining the closed world that made them. That life is not a tragedy in the way a sudden death is a tragedy. It is a complete life, with its loves and its labours and its small joys, lived fully within the walls. That is precisely what makes it land. The person did not suffer some dramatic catastrophe. They simply lived an entire human existence inside a sealed room, owning nothing but the box, giving their one life to the maintenance of a voyage they did not begin and will not finish, for the sake of strangers not yet born, under a sky that was never real. And there were dozens of generations of them, each one a full life lived in the corridor, each one the whole of someone's existence, all of them the unchosen middle of a crossing that used up their lives as the fuel of its own continuation. Multiply that one life by the full length of the voyage, and the scale of it lands. A crossing of 1,000 years holds something like 40 generations, and a crossing of several thousand years holds well over 100, each generation a full population of complete lives, every one of them born and lived and died entirely within the walls. The founders are a single generation at the start, the arrivers are a single generation at the end. Between them stretch dozens upon dozens of generations, hundreds of thousands of individual human lives across the longest crossings, the overwhelming majority of everyone the voyage will ever hold, and not one of them sees a sky that is not a hull. The voyage is not mostly founders and arrivers with a little transit in between. It is almost entirely transit, almost entirely the unchosen middle, the founders and arrivers only the thin bright edges of a vast dark interior made of ordinary lives lived in a box. Think of a whole life lived inside a single sealed room whose door is never once opened. A person born in that room who grows up in it, works in it, loves in it, grows old and dies in it, and never steps through the door, would not experience the room as a prison, because a prison implies a known outside. They would experience it simply as the world, the only world, complete and sufficient and ordinary. The horror is not in their experience, which is just a life. The horror is in the view from outside, in seeing that the entire world of a complete human existence was a room in transit, a corridor between two places the person never touched, a life spent maintaining a passage they had no part in choosing and no chance of completing. That is the life of the middle generations, multiplied by dozens, the true and largest population of the voyage, each of them a whole world unto themselves, all of them sealed in the box. And the door is not merely closed but unopenable, which removes even the comfort of a choice declined. A person in a sealed room on a planet, at least, lives beside the possibility of leaving, the door a thing they could open if they chose, the staying a decision remade each day. The person aboard the ship has no such door. The hatch opens only onto vacuum and death. The outside not a place withheld, but a place that does not exist for a living body at all. There is no choice being declined, no outside being refused, only an inside that is the whole of the possible, walls that are not a barrier between the person and a world, but the very limit of where a world can be. To be born aboard is to be born already at the edge of everything, with nothing beyond the wall but the dark, and to live a whole life knowing that the only world there is happens to be a few miles of turning metal, and that this was settled before any of them drew a first breath, by people long dead, for reasons that may no longer mean anything to anyone alive. The cylinder is still crossing. Its lights still burn, its hull still turns, the air inside it still moves through the lungs of people who were born to walls and will die to walls, generations deep into a voyage that began before any of them drew breath and will end after all of them are gone. The ship is doing everything it was built to do. It holds its heading, it keeps its people, it crosses the dark mile after mile, exactly as the founders planned, and that is the whole of the horror. Because the plan was never a passage at all. The plan was a sealed world. And a sealed world fails, slowly, in every direction at once, its air thinning, its parts wearing, its blood narrowing, its purpose dissolving, and to carry out that plan faithfully is only to fail on the founder's schedule. The Ark was sold as a lifeboat carrying life across the dark to a new shore. What actually crosses the dark is a small closed world running down, lit and warm and ordinary inside, full of people living complete lives in a corridor between two places they will never touch, keeping a dying machine alive for the sake of strangers not yet born. The founders are dust. The arrivers, if any arrive, will be strangers to the world that launched them and strangers to the world that receives them. And the vast middle, the true population of the voyage, simply lives and dies in transit, owning nothing but the box. The Earth carries every living thing through the same dark, in the same kind of closed and finite world, fed only by a single star, and bound by the same arithmetic of dwindling stores. The only question left is how long the larger arc has been crossing, and how much of its air has already, quietly, begun to go.